She used to trace lazy circles on my chest after we made love, those soft, unconscious gestures that meant everything and nothing at once. I can't remember the last time she touched me like that. Now, when she touches me, it's either out of obligation or anger. And if I'm honest with myself, I don't know which one is worse. For a long time, I tried not to take it personally. Samantha was going through a tough time, I told myself. Work stress. Hormonal changes. Maybe even seasonal depression. There was always something I could blame to keep myself from blaming her. But that grace didn't go both ways. Everything became my fault. The dirty dishes in the sink. The way the bathroom towels were folded. The silence between us when we sat on the couch watching TV. You never talk anymore, she'd say, staring at her phone while I tried to find the right words to say. If I did speak, it was the wrong tone. If I didn't, it was emotional neglect. You've changed, she told me one night, her arms folded like a barricade between us. You're not who I fell in love with. I looked at her, really looked, and realized I didn't even know who she was anymore. But I said nothing. Just took the blame. Again. There was always a reason for her resentment. Something I'd done, or failed to do. She brought up moments from years ago, arguments we'd had, things I thought we'd moved past. Everything was ammunition, and I was the target. And still, I tried. I planned weekend getaways, cooked dinner, bought flowers on random Wednesdays just to remind her I was still here. But the more I gave, the more it seemed to confirm to her that I owed her something. Like I was apologizing for sins I couldn't even name. She'd cry, sometimes. Tell me she felt alone in the relationship. And I'd hold her, even if her sadness felt like a storm I hadn't caused. But eventually, even her tears started to feel like they weren't for me, they were for the version of me she thought I'd stopped being. The man who made her laugh, who made her feel seen. I wanted to be that man again. God, I tried. But there's only so much you can do when someone has already decided you're the problem. So I became quieter. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of having my every word twisted into something ugly. I tiptoed around her emotions like a man navigating landmines, knowing that one misstep could ignite another round of accusations. I was bleeding slowly, invisibly. And she didn't see it, or didn't want to. After all, I was the villain in her story. The man who didn't love enough, didn't try enough, didn't understand her. So I played the part. I let her blame me. Because maybe if I absorbed all the hurt, she'd stop feeling it. But deep down, something inside me had already started to crack. It didn't happen in a single moment. It wasn't some explosive argument or final straw that broke everything apart. That's not how these things usually go. The truth is, it was death by 1,000 small cuts, quiet dismissals, unacknowledged efforts, and conversations that always circled back to what I wasn't doing right. One night, after another argument that started over something as trivial as forgetting to buy oat milk, I stood in the kitchen staring at the countertop where Samantha had slammed her keys down. My mind wasn't angry. It was quiet. Too quiet. That's when I realized something had changed inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. I had reached the point where trying felt like an act of self-betrayal. I had always been patient, too patient, maybe. I believed in working through things, in not giving up when things got hard. Relationships required effort, compromise, forgiveness. I believed in those things. Still do. But what I hadn't realized until that moment was that I was the only one showing up to do the work. Samantha didn't want solutions. She wanted control. She wanted to be right, even if it meant rewriting history to make me the villain. She began weaponizing vulnerability, twisting open-hearted conversations into court depositions. I'd confess a fear or regret, hoping for connection, and instead find myself cross-examined. So you admit you've been emotionally distant, she'd say. You just said it yourself. Any crack I exposed was used to reinforce her narrative. I started to see the patterns for what they were: emotional manipulation, plain and simple. Guilt was her currency. And for a long time, I'd been willing to pay the price. But guilt is a debt that never runs out if you let someone else define what you owe. What made it worse was how subtle it had all become. There weren't yelling matches or thrown dishes. Samantha didn't scream, she sighed. She rolled her eyes. She raised her voice just enough to say, "You always do this." She'd walk away mid-conversation, then later accuse me of abandoning the discussion. It was gaslighting, though I didn't want to use that word for the longest time. It felt too dramatic, too clinical. But what else do you call it when someone makes you doubt your own memory, your own intentions? The tipping point came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I had spent the day working a 10-hour shift, picked up dinner on my way home, and even grabbed her favorite wine, the one with the floral label she liked. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a quiet night. But as soon as I walked in, I saw it. Her face. That look. Like I had already failed a test I didn't even know I was taking. She barely acknowledged the food. Didn't thank me. Didn't ask about my day. She sat at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone, occasionally sighing like the air itself had offended her. After 20 minutes of trying to make conversation, I asked, gently, "Is everything okay?" She put her phone down and looked at me like I'd just insulted her. "Why do you always ask that? God, Luke, you're so emotionally needy. Can't you just be normal for once?" And there it was. That word. Needy. It rang in my ears long after she left the room. I stood there, in the middle of our quiet house, surrounded by everything we had built, photos on the wall, books we picked out together, furniture we argued about and eventually agreed on, and I realized none of it meant anything anymore. Not really. Because this wasn't a home. It was a crime scene. And I was tired of being the only suspect. That night, I slept on the couch, not because we had argued, but because I needed space to think. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to the sound of nothing. No apologies. No footsteps coming down the hall. Just silence. And in that silence, I found my clarity. I didn't want to fix it anymore. Not like this. Not alone. I didn't hate her, I wish I did. Hate would have been easier. Cleaner. But I loved her, and that made it harder to accept the truth: loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them break you. So I made a choice. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't storm out. But I would walk away. Not out of cruelty, but out of mercy, for both of us. Because the man she kept blaming wasn't who I was anymore. And the woman I loved didn't exist in her anymore. When I finally walked away, it wasn't with a suitcase in hand or a slammed door echoing through the hallway. It wasn't cinematic. There was no yelling, no final confrontation. Just quiet, deliberate absence. Sometimes, the loudest goodbye is the one you never say out loud. I had spent years fighting for our relationship with everything I had: patience, love, forgiveness, and hope. But one day, I simply stopped. Stopped arguing. Stopped trying to prove I was good enough. Stopped carrying the emotional weight of two people. There wasn't a specific trigger. It was just the realization that I had been trying to save something that no longer wanted to be saved. A fire can't be rekindled when the wood is soaked with resentment. It began with detachment, subtle and slow, like a shadow retreating with the setting sun. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped tiptoeing around her moods. I let the blame roll off me like rain on a windshield. I stopped reacting to the accusations, the sighs, the disapproving glares. She noticed at first, and I could see her confusion when I didn't respond the way I used to. I no longer defended myself, no longer reached across the emotional chasm to pull her back to me. She tried to bait me at times, picking small fights, pushing buttons she knew well. But I gave her nothing. Not out of spite, but because I had finally accepted the truth. Samantha didn't want peace. She wanted control. And I wasn't going to let her use my love as a leash anymore. I remember the morning I truly let go. It was a Sunday. The sky was overcast, and the air carried that damp, earthy scent of coming rain. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, both sipping coffee in silence. It should have been a peaceful moment, but the air between us was tense, heavy with all the things we no longer said. She made a comment, something trivial, yet designed to sting. "You never support me the way I need," she said, without even looking up from her cup. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just nodded once and went back to reading the newspaper. That was it. That was the last time I emotionally engaged with her. That moment became the invisible line between before and after. That week, I started packing, quietly, without announcement. A little each night while she was asleep or distracted. Just the essentials. Clothes. Documents. A few books. Some photos I didn't want to leave behind. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want the drama. I just wanted freedom. I didn't leave a note, and I didn't say goodbye. I left the key on the counter, next to the vase where we used to put fresh flowers back when we still tried. I walked out the door one Thursday morning like it was any other day, dressed for work, briefcase in hand, calm in my chest. But I didn't go to the office. I went to the small apartment I'd signed a lease on 2 weeks prior. The space wasn't much, just one bedroom, a kitchenette, and an old but comfortable couch, but it was mine. It was quiet. It was clean. It was free of judgment and disappointment. The first night alone was strange. Not painful. Not liberating. Just quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I sat on the edge of my new bed and stared at the wall, listening to nothing but the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I had expected some kind of flood of emotion, grief, guilt, even relief. But what I felt was emptiness. Not the sad kind. The clear kind. Like a room that's finally been cleaned out after years of clutter. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Days passed. Then weeks. Samantha didn't call. She didn't text. I think, deep down, she believed it was temporary. That I'd return once I cooled off. That I'd fall back into the pattern, as I always had. But I had broken the cycle. There was no turning back. Letting go didn't mean I stopped caring. I still thought about her, still wondered how she was doing, if she was lonely, if she understood what she'd lost. But I no longer felt responsible for her sadness or her healing. That was hers to carry now. I had my own healing to do. In those early weeks, I rediscovered things I had lost, my love for early morning walks, the comfort of a good book, the stillness of coffee enjoyed in complete silence. I picked up sketching again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with friends I'd quietly distanced myself from during the hardest years of our relationship. I started going to therapy, not to mourn the end of us, but to find myself again. The beauty of letting go is that it leaves your hands empty, ready to receive something new. Not someone new, not right away. Just peace. Stillness. Space to breathe and think and be. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just done pretending that love was supposed to feel like sacrifice. Because real love, healthy love, shouldn't feel like drowning while the other person insists the water isn't even rising. At first, Samantha didn't panic. When she came home to find the house quiet and Luke gone, there was a strange calm in her chest. She thought he just needed some space, maybe a night or two to blow off steam. He had done that before, taking late drives, checking into a hotel after one of their worst fights, staying away just long enough to make a point. He always came back. That's what Luke did. He stayed, even when he shouldn't have. So when his clothes weren't in the closet, and the toothbrush was gone, she told herself he was making a statement. When she noticed the drawer with their shared documents was empty, her heart tensed for a moment, but she dismissed it. He was trying to scare her. He was punishing her with silence. That's all. She spent the first few days in that strange denial, convincing herself this was part of the game they'd always played. The dance of conflict and reconciliation. He was the calm, she was the storm, and somehow they had always managed to return to center. But the days stretched on, and there was no call. No text. No return. She checked her phone constantly, even when she pretended not to. Every buzz made her pulse jump. Every silence after it settled like dust in her lungs. She didn't reach out at first, not because she didn't want to, but because pride is a stubborn wall. She'd convinced herself that he was overreacting, that he was being dramatic. After all, she was the one who always got hurt. She was the one who had sacrificed. Right? But the house told a different story. Luke had always been the one who turned off the porch light at night. Who folded the blankets on the couch. Who emptied the dishwasher without needing to be asked. In his absence, the small routines unraveled. The garbage piled up. The laundry sat in the dryer for 3 days. She kept walking past things and expecting them to be done, only to realize, he's not here to do them anymore. It was subtle at first, this creeping awareness. A slow peeling back of comfort to reveal what had truly kept her world intact. The coffee didn't taste the same when she made it. The quiet in the house wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. She tried calling a friend the first weekend he was gone, but even in the middle of laughter, she felt hollow. Nothing felt real anymore. A week passed, then 2. Still nothing. That's when the anger began to shift. Not the explosive kind she was used to wielding like a sword in their fights, but a quieter, colder anger. The kind that turns inward. She started to remember things differently. Not from the place of hurt, but from a place of truth. The late nights when Luke stayed up to talk to her after she'd cried through another argument. The times he'd cancelled plans to make her feel prioritized. The way he never fought back with cruelty, even when she knew she was being unfair. It was easier to blame him. Blame kept her safe. Blame let her stay the victim. But blame also blinded her to her own unraveling. Without him to absorb her frustration, she had no one left to push against. The mirror became sharper in his absence. She saw herself, her impulsiveness, her deflection, the way she always needed someone to be wrong so she could feel right. And it made her sick to her stomach. One night, after too many glasses of wine, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally picked up her phone. She stared at his contact, thumb hovering over the call button. She even typed out a message, "Can we talk?" But she deleted it before sending. She couldn't find the right words. What could she say that would undo the silence she'd demanded from him for so long? That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing his voice in her head, not shouting, not accusing, just the way he used to say her name when she was upset. "Sam. It's me. I'm right here." And now he wasn't. The realization didn't hit all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like a bruise spreading under skin. She had pushed away the one person who always tried to understand her. The one who never asked her to be perfect. He hadn't left in anger. He had left in exhaustion. And that hurt more than anything. Because it meant he had nothing left to fight with. He used to look at her like she was fragile but precious. Like something worth protecting. But she remembered the last time she looked into his eyes, there was nothing there. No spark. No fight. Just a man who had already let go long before his body walked out the door. And now she was alone. Not in the empowering, self-rediscovery kind of way she once thought she wanted, but in the cold, sobering kind of way that made every room feel colder. She thought losing him would give her power. Instead, it revealed how much of her identity had been built on being held together by someone else. Samantha stood in front of the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked older or worn, but because she looked empty. She had won the argument, maybe. But she'd lost the only person who had ever stayed to listen. And the worst part? He hadn't slammed the door. He'd simply let go. Luke didn't wake up one morning completely healed. There was no epiphany, no grand moment of closure. Instead, the healing came slowly, like sunlight slipping through the cracks of a dark room. The first few weeks alone were quiet, not empty, but calm. The kind of calm that made him realize how loud his life had become when he lived under constant emotional strain. He started small. Morning walks without looking at his phone. Grocery trips where he bought the things he liked, not what he thought someone else wanted. Music returned to his life, albums he hadn't listened to in years because they reminded Samantha of simpler times she no longer believed in. His apartment, though sparse, began to reflect something he hadn't felt in a long time: ease. Nothing felt performative. No one was watching. He didn't have to explain himself anymore. Therapy helped. It gave him space to unpack years of silence, the kind of silence that builds when one person in a relationship keeps carrying the weight of two. He learned, slowly, that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was survival. That walking away didn't make him weak. It meant he finally recognized his own worth. There were moments of sadness, of course. Regret crept in sometimes, especially when he remembered the better days. But the regret wasn't about leaving. It was about staying as long as he had. Still, he forgave himself. He had stayed because he loved her. Because he had hoped. There was no shame in that. Meanwhile, Samantha's days grew longer. At first, she filled the silence with noise, friends, errands, social media, distractions. But distraction isn't healing. It's just avoidance in disguise. Eventually, even her friends began to notice the change in her. The restlessness. The edge to her voice. The quiet moments when her eyes seemed to drift off, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. She tried dating again, briefly. But it always ended the same way, unfulfilling. No one offered her the quiet safety Luke had. No one matched her emotional volatility with calm. With others, she felt exposed rather than understood. And over time, she realized that what she had taken for granted wasn't just a person, it was a piece she may never find again. The house, once full of subtle reminders of Luke, now felt sterile. She thought his absence would feel empowering. Instead, it was heavy. Like a silence that lingered too long. She missed his steadiness, the way he used to bring her tea when she was upset, the way he'd rub her back in the middle of the night when she couldn't sleep, even if they'd fought just hours before. But by then, it was too late. Luke didn't hate her. He didn't wish her pain. He had simply moved on. Not to someone else, not yet, but toward himself. He was learning how to be his own anchor. And with each passing day, he felt lighter. He laughed more easily. Slept deeper. He had started journaling, even meditating. The man who once bent himself in quiet desperation to hold a relationship together was now learning to stand tall on his own. Samantha would sometimes open her phone and scroll through old photos. Smiling snapshots, moments frozen in time that no longer belonged to her. The man in those pictures wasn't coming back. And the woman she had been, sharp-tongued, emotionally tangled, unable to see the value of what she had, was someone she could barely face in the mirror. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic conclusion. No fiery closure, no last-minute pleas. Just two people. One who finally let go. And one who realized too late that he was the only thing holding her together.